So my friends who are there, and I've talked to some of them there, say there's very likely that that situation might explode. And we're hoping it will happen. And the 11th of July, you had a big demonstration. Yeah, Cuba immediately cut down the email and the websites. And obviously they had planned it ahead of time. And people are so desperate. It's not only the coronavirus, it's the hunger, it's the desperation. So it's pretty desperate. So my dad was well known. He was, there was a Villanova in Cuba. There was a university there. And my dad was a dean of engineering there. So he was very well known. And they knew he was not ideologically in support of communism. Well, in 1959, he took over. And then I was 17 years old. And he stayed there. He has stayed there for 60 plus years. But I was there for 3 years. He immediately took over the whole country and forbid nobody could have any guns. Then when the Bay of Pigs took place, we did not expect this. But in that day, he sent his army to pick up prisoners. And that's when they picked us up. Corral. I looked out the window of my room, and the house was surrounded by militiamen. And one of them went like this, and they entered through all the doors. They said, everybody go to the living room. They checked the whole house, and they said, everybody above 12, get in the car. We're all going to prison. So
just like that.
They took, just like that. And we had 2 visitors. They took them too. My mother had just lost a baby. So we pleaded with them, and they allowed her to stay because she was bleeding. We are a large family. We are 14 brothers and sisters, and all the little kids were there. So fortunately, they left her behind. But they took us all to prison. That day was me, my 2 sisters, and 2 visitors that were there. The assumption is, the logical assumption was that they wanted to control everybody that they thought could be a help to the invaders or could be against Fidel. So there were 2 purposes. Was to control us so we wouldn't help the invaders. The second one, to keep everybody else scared. And that's the way communism works. Put people in prison forever. No judgment, no trial, nothing. And guess how many prisoners they picked in one day? Think of a number. I'm going to tell you. 100,000 prisoners. Fidel had the biggest army in all of Central and South America. And he didn't have where to put these prisoners. So they took my dad and they put him at the La Cabaña fortress at the entrance of Havana. It was there for 3,000 soldiers. And what they did is they put 6,000 prisoners. Then they found another fortress called El Príncipe, and there they put 5,000 prisoners all over the country. When my dad in his prison at nighttime, he could hear the executions. And they said that Che Guevara had a special place where he would watch them. And he would say, I love blood. And the more I love the smell of blood, the more I like to hear these executions. Then they sent me to a woman's prison. And over there, this is what I saw. One day, they wanted to move some prisoners out. And the prisoners refused to. So they brought fire engines and firemen, and with hoses, they started shooting the water to the women. And one of them was pregnant. So you know where they put the hose? They aimed the hose and the water to her stomach. The most beautiful thing is that all the other women surrounded her, and the baby was saved. Initially, they put us in an in-between house. So we were in the second floor, women, in the first floor, men. That was called the G2. And there was no food, and we were all crowded. And in the morning, we get the newspaper, and somebody will read the names of those that were executed that morning.
Wow.
And I couldn't even say that I knew them, because we suspected that there might have been a spy there among the prisoners. And then one day we look out, and the guard was touching this woman, and they went to a room, and we all assumed what they were doing. And we sort of initially condemned the woman. Then we realized that her husband was in the first floor, and he was diabetic. And she accepted to have sex with this guard in order to get him food for her husband. And that is, for me, it was a learning experience. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, they were not that bad with me, and then ultimately they gave us some food. But my mom did not know where we went, and she visited prison and prison and prison looking for us, looking for her kids. And finally, she did find us, and we were able to wave through the window of that in-between house. We were in prison in a private home for a week. Then they put us to the real prison. So then my mom would go and had to go visit my dad at the prison too. And if with me, some of the women in prison would tell me how their children were forced to go to demonstrations supporting Fidel Castro. And their children were instructed to spy on them, to spy on their parents and report their parents. And that's how communism works. They turn the children against you. And some of the women that were with me, their husbands were executed. So it was the way they keep the fear in the whole nation by persecuting and executing people. We were allowed to leave. We managed to leave. There was a ferry boat, and the owner of the ferry boat sort of maneuvered and allowed people to come. And with he was able to get my dad to sneak him in there, and my dad was able to come first. Then all of us came, and we came legally. We had paperwork done ahead of time. So we all came to America. And my brother, who was able to leave a little bit early in the ferry boat, he said the ferry boat passed in front of where my dad was in prison. And he said he felt like he was abandoning his father and abandoning everybody. But he was, at that time, he was a seminarian. He was studying to be a priest. And he had asked my dad, he had sent my dad a little note, do I leave? And my dad sent a note back saying, yes, the more of you that leave, the easier it is for me. So we felt like we were abandoning. I felt like I was abandoning my country and abandoning my people. But I didn't know if I stayed, what was going to happen anyhow. So I was able to leave. However, I have an uncle, Ignacio, who died in prison. And I have another uncle who fulfilled 8 years of prison. And many of my college friends had long, long prison sentences, and many of them were executed. And that is how communism works. but they have managed to convince the world that Cuba is in good shape. And Castro has the longest propaganda system in the world. And you can see people in the United States wearing Che Guevara shirts and talking about the advantages of Cuba. You can hear Bernie Sanders saying that Cuba is fantastic, and they're fooled the whole world. And they say it's one of the most powerful propagandas that there are, but they manage to change things and lie and convince the world. For example, Cuba forces medical doctors to go to other countries. There's Cuban medical doctors in 102 countries. But you know what they do? The doctors are not allowed to bring their wives, and they get paid very little. The countries, like Brazil and other countries, they pay the Cuban government, and the Cuban government gives the doctors very little and makes money with them. So it's really like slavery, correct? And communism started little by little. First they closed all the Catholic schools, and then they started controlling more and more each time. They have on each block, they create they have a family that's called the revolution, the witnesses of the revolution. So each block has a spy, and this family reports anything they see you do. So later on, when I went back, the minute I visited somebody, shortly after that, the police was there asking who was I and what was I doing. So you have your neighbors in each block spying you, and then in the schools, they tell your children to spy on you. So even the parents cannot talk to the children openly; they have to hide things. And since there is no food, they have a ration card that only covers food for 2 days. The rest of the month, everybody steals. So they steal from the government because the government owes everything. So if you work in a school, when you pass next to the bag with black beans, you steal some and you put it in your pocket. And then there's all kinds of combinations of how to steal and how to live. But in their mind, they think the whole world is like that. And that's how they control people. This is the amount of food you can buy a month. So, for example, this is one example I'd like to give. It's a coffee. They give you 4 ounces of coffee for the whole month. So here, I measured it this morning, 4 ounces of coffee. This is what you get for the whole month, which is what I drink every morning. And they offer you, for the whole month, they just give you a piece of chicken. That's all the meat you get for a whole month.
For a month?
Here it is.
Wow.
For a month. A piece of chicken, the whole month.
Wow.
And per person. And 1 hamburger per person. Here's a hamburger. I brought it so you can have it in your mind. Have it in your mind. Have the visual image of that 1 chicken that they give you for the whole month. So then after that, what do? I had a priest, a rabbi, and a minister, and I asked them, what do you do? You know what the answer was? Mm-hmm. Everybody steals. The government, the members of the government themselves, they steal too. So I had, for example, one lady that told me her husband was in the army. She steals, but she doesn't tell him. Now, I knew another lady whose job was to check the grocery stores. So she checks, and then they bribe her. She says, okay, I'm not going to tell on you if you give me this much. And then, for example, people go put gasoline in the car, and they drive a government truck. So they say to the gas owner, just charge me for a full tank, but just put half, and you and I divide the other half. So the whole country is doing it. And yes, the government knows, so they wait, and they, whenever they want, then they attack the person. And in the meantime, they have everybody controlled. And the thing is that people like Sanders and people that go to Cuba don't see that. So they say, everybody has a ration card. Here I have a write-up from a newspaper called The Economist in 2014, and he says, everybody has food. Everybody gets a ration card. But the writers and journalists are fooled. They go to Cuba and they never see the real thing. And that is one thing that happens, that Cuba has the whole world fooled. And I know a friend of mine that came to America said, I just didn't want to be hungry all the time, and I'm not knowing what to eat. I didn't want to leave my children and my grandchildren, but I didn't want to die of hunger. So it is a close call there. There's other things, too, that are much more sad. Mm-hmm. One is abortions. They force women, they talk them into having abortions. And since the women have no food, they have the abortion. So Cuba has one of the highest abortion rates in the world. Wow. And the same thing happens with suicides. People are so desperate, they commit suicide. And I have a lady friend, Maida Donati. She was part of the government in Cuba and did the whole research. And they found out that the rate of suicide was one of the highest in the world. And also that women commit as many suicides as men, which is not the rest of the world. And my girlfriend, this lady who I met, Maida Donati, managed to escape to the United States, and she wrote it in her master's thesis in Miami University. The worst part is people are so hungry that they do anything. So they go do prostitution. And Fidel Castro said, we have the best prostitutes in the world because they're teachers, they're engineers, and fathers take their children out to do prostitution so they can eat. What happened is, I have another lady friend whom I know, and she was telling me how it broke her heart to see her daughter going out at night and doing prostitution, but that was the only way they could eat. So, and another example, I had a friend, a college student, went to Cuba, and they told him, this woman came to him and said, you see that 15-year-old girl over there? She's my daughter, and you can have it for the night for $25. So he said, no, I'm not interested. So then, you know what the lady said? She said, well, you see her 9-year-old sister next to her? You could have her. So people are so desperate that they fall apart. Cuba hospitals have no oxygen, no medicine. I think Cuba has they themselves created some vaccinations, and it's not sure if they are working. So people are dying. And I think Cuba has one of the highest percentage of death in the world. I saw that this morning. They don't have where to bury people, so they're opening the backyards or whatever and burying the bodies there. So the situation is bad to start with. People were yelling, we want freedom, we want freedom. And that's what I like people to hear, that communism and socialism doesn't work. Those rules, the government ruling and making all the laws and everything, doesn't work. We would like it to work, but it doesn't work. And here in America, you have all the colleges, the students being told and brainwashed. They're saying that how important socialism is, and even Marxism. And if you take away private initiative and have the government telling everybody what to do, it doesn't work. My family used to own one sugar mill. Cuba used to be the highest producers of sugar in the whole world. And now Cuba is importing sugar from Brazil. Out of 240 sugar mills, Cuba has only like 20 left. They didn't take care of them. They didn't repair them. So I'd like everybody who's listening to me to know that socialism doesn't work and Marxism doesn't work. So they see God and religion as the enemy of socialism, the enemy of the government. So they forbid all kinds of religious activity. And I want people to hear that, because they get fooled and they don't realize how bad Cuba is. That Cuba has fooled the whole world. I go around and I give speeches all the time. And, I wish it would have been good if Cuba would have been good. Of course, since we had the embargo, we have not had good news, a lot of information about Cuba. Now, you want to hear the most interesting thing? Even the Cubans in Cuba, they think the whole world is like that.
Wow.
So, yeah. I was talking to a girl who came here about 5 years ago, and she said, I don't understand how I was so fooled. But going back to America, my daughter is a professor at Princeton Theological Seminary in New Jersey. And she says all those colleges, they're all advocating socialism. And my son, my older son, is a professor at Georgia Tech, and he says the same thing. So, of course, they are standing up for the truth. Mm-hmm. And that's why I wrote a book, my book called Leaving Cuba. And here's a copy. And I tell my whole story in the book. I am so proud of my son. I never, ever dreamed that my son was going to be a congressman. Never. But I think there's something called immigrant push, that when the immigrants come, America has so much opportunity that they work really hard. And I'll take a little bit of pride that I helped him when he was in high school. He participated in public speaking, and then he went to Dartmouth, where he also took public speaking, and he took principles of politics. So I am so proud of him. I'm so proud of America. My nephew is the mayor of Miami now, Francis Suarez, and he's attracting all kinds of investments to Miami. But even more, his father, who is my brother, Xavier, was the first Cuban mayor of a big city. He was the mayor of Miami in 1985. He went to Villanova and studied engineering, and then he decided he went to Harvard and studied law because he decided he wanted to get into politics and wanted to make the difference. So the two of them, especially my brother, was an example for Alex. So Alex would go down to Miami and help him campaign. But also I have to give credit to my husband. My husband, Vincent Mooney, I was the first one to marry an American. And he went to Vietnam. He was a captain there, and he was a computer man, but he was a great believer of the principles of the Constitution, the freedom given to us by God, our inalienable rights. And ever since Alex was growing up, my husband would teach him that. So my children learned from him, and then they have from me the story and the pain that I carry, because all the Cubans carry pain in their heart, knowing that the country is still suffering. I think we have two Cubans, Cubans that had run, Cuban descendants who ran for president. We have Marco Rubio, and Marco Rubio is constantly talking. And we have Ted Cruz, whose father was in prison in Cuba, and they're originally from the same area of Cuba that my family is, Matanzas. So not only are the Cubans worried, but they're trying to do something, and they're politically very active and trying to get this country to stay the right way. I have a professor, Grossclose, that teaches that at the university level, and he says the media lies. So we have to learn to analyze it. And also he says that one of the ways that the media lies is by what they don't say. They just tell you something, but they don't tell you the whole truth. So we have to become smart in finding a way to get reality and not let the media brainwash us.